Hi, you are watching Toon Matrix. Please watch the previous part for better understanding.
We hear someone asking about slave returning alive. A man says that's right, Mr. Abbeys, and he returned without any injuries. Abbeys asks, what's wrong with returning alive? It's not unlikely for some bait to return safe and sound. The man replies that all of the adventurers accompanying him died inside the gate. Abbeys says that's surprising, considering he didn't run away, and came back on his own 2 feet. He says people who have been reduced to slave due to their debt will end up being a bait again, even if they return alive, and he returned despite knowing this fact, which means he is well aware that he can't get out of our grasp and death is the only escape, because that is the way of Gaffer Merchant Union after all. He asks, why do I have to be reported of such trivial matter? The man replies, there is one more event to report, and that is the bait has awakened his first circle. Abbeys was shocked to hear this news, and says a bait is now a 1 circle, you say. He says to himself a slave could harbor negative thoughts towards the Union, and things could go wrong. The man then says that Paume is asking for a change in contract, and he would like to be registered as an adventurer. Abbeys says a slave should know their place, but the man replies that Rakan has ordered him to look into this matter personally. After hearing the name Rakan, Abbeys jumps out of his seat. I thought he got piles issues. Abbeys wonders why an executive of the Union is showing interest in a lowly slave, then he looks at a book lying on the table and wonders if it's because of that. Then the man leaves the room. Abbeys thinks about the matter while standing near the window. More world lore, we came to know that under the name of Queen Cygnus, the status of slave can exist. But this is nothing more than a superficial talk, as people have always been slave to Meso, a currency of Maple World. And if people fail to pay back what they owe, so they have to pay it back through labor. The day Paume's father died due to an illness, he ended up becoming a slave as well. He purchased a herb called black moss from the merchant union, and they jacked up the prices. And due to him failing to pay the amount back, he was deemed by court to work as a laborer equal to the amount he owes, and was exploited for 6 years by the union. Now it's time for his revenge. He introduces himself as El Paume to Abbeys. Paume recognizes Abbeys from his past life as Rakan's left hand, and says he caught a good fish. Abbeys says he already received the report, so I will keep it short, and puts down his drink on the table. Abbeys says that he will modify his contract to that of F-rank adventurer. Paume says thank you for accepting it, however I would like E rank. Abbeys says that the association hasn't even assigned you a rank. Paume replies he had explored hundreds of gates over past 3 years as the baiting slave. Abbeys says, exactly, as a baiting slave, and you have never caught a monster. Then Paume asks why is monster hunting is a virtue for being an adventurer. The reason the first adventurer can make a name for himself was due to survival, and says that the virtue of an adventurer is returning alive from the gate. Abbeys admits that it's true. He says surviving as a bait slave for 3 years is no ordinary feat, but it's only in low-ranking gates. He asks if his pathetic survival skill will work in higher gates, and says he is taking the union for idiots who'd offer risky contract to someone who'll die without paying them back. He takes out a cigar and lights it. He says to himself that our MC thinks he is all high and mighty, and he wouldn't be able to go far. But Abbeys wonders what this repulsive feeling he is getting from our MC is. He tells Paume that there is a gate where only 5 can enter and it has 12 marks. He laughs and says yes, there have 12 parties whose bones are buried inside that gate. He says to Paume to prove your worth, and if you prove it, Abbeys with a smirk on his face says I'll do whatever you want.
Honey, you've got a big storm coming.
We see a party Paume's going with. One of them introduces himself as Chev, and says he is the tank of this party. Chev says that I have heard about you being a bait slave, but I don't care about stuff like that, and the same goes for the party. Paume says, I hope we have good time working together. Then one of them says that I heard he can use magic, and asks which elemental magic he can use. Chev says, I heard mages can only use the element they are born with, and any item that is unrelated to their element is useless to them, and asks if he's heard about that. Then Chev says enough chit-chat. You must have already heard that the goal of this mission is not clear the gate, but to safely retrieve the items of previous parties that died inside the gate. If they return it to the Union, they will get 3,000 meso per item. Then one of the party members sighs and says, the Union is being cheap, 3,000 meso isn't even half to of what it amounts. Another member asks him to stop complaining. They both argue with each other. Then Chev says time to make some money, and they head inside the gate. Chev asks them to pay attention as there is a high chances of long battle, so they must set up a base first. One of them suggests to make it above the tree. Chev agrees to it. We see them preparing material needed to set up base. Then the dark guy says to Paume to just rest, as setting up base is their speciality. They quickly built their base and decided to split up to search the surroundings. We came to know the rest of party member names. Tom, Max, and Roa are in one team and Chev and Paume are in one team. Chev says they'll go in opposite direction, and if something happens, send a signal and rush back to the base, and then they head out. After a while Chev wonders why they've not run into any monster, let alone an item. He then asks Paume how his first mission as an adventurer looking. Paume replies, "I am nervous." Chev laughs and says that's how it is, and says I have been adventurer for a long time yet, I am still nervous as I have always been a scaredy cat. He says despite that I have courage to go inside a gate, because I trust my party members, and tells how they are very good people. He says he felt bad after hearing Paume's story about being a bait slave, and invites Paume to join his party. When Chev turns back, he sees Paume is staring at something. The scene shifts at night time where all the party members are having dinner sitting around a campfire, and talking among themselves. Paume is drinking from his water bottle. Then it jumps to later night. Chev approaches Paume asking if he is sleeping, but Paume doesn't answer him. Max asks Chev, "What are you doing?" And then takes out his blade, menacingly saying how could he reply as he is lost in his dreams. He says you are too cautious, did you forget what they have mixed in his food, and says he gulped down so much, he'd be lucky to not die. One of them says a fire arrow wand will cost around 10,000 meso. Max menacingly laughs, and while raising the dagger, he says, "It's time to get to work." He stabs into the sleeping bag, and realizes it feels weird. Then it is revealed that Paume is not there.
Turn the fasten seatbelt sign back on because shit is about to get real.
They all freaked out after knowing that Paume is missing. Chev shouts to find him, and says he couldn't have gotten far. Suddenly an explosion hits their base, engulfing it in fire. Tom asks about the sudden fire and shouts to take out their food items first. Chev wonders if it is Paume's doing. Then Tom points at something, and the party is greeted by a slimy creature with a giant eyeball. Chev gets terrified as he realizes that they have been used as a bait by Paume. They jump off their base, as it gets munched on by the slimy creature. Paume watches them from a tree saying they are lacking. If they wanted to trick me then they shouldn't have been so kind. In a gate where 12 party died, they accepted a bait slave. It was obvious that they were up to something. Anyways, I had an inkling that this slime was the boss monster after seeing the broken parts, but it's larger than I thought. It continues chasing after them through the woods. Tom then asks Chev what is that monster. Chev briefs, that is a rare monster called gold slime, that comes out in only red gates. Its body is made of acid, so it's worst match for melee adventurers like us, and the most dangerous part is, then he sees it attack and pushes Tom out of the way. Tom asks what it was, and Chev tells him that it was acid arrow, a long-range attack, one of the monster's skill. Tom, while panicking, says it's cheating. Chev tells him to get a hold of yourself and get to running. His party asks how to defeat the monster. Chev replies they have to attack at the monster's core, which is its only weakness, but tells them to get to a safe place first, as its acid arrow is on 1 minute cooldown. After hearing about the cooldown, Max rushes back to attack the monster, saying they have enough time. He leaps off at the monster saying to leave everything to me. Chev tries to stop him, but it's too late because Max is already split in half by the boss monster. Chev got confused and says it should have more time to its cooldown. The monster fires another acid arrow, turning everyone to bones. Paume was standing behind a tree hiding from the monster. He says, "It looks like it's over," and Chev wasn't wrong. But a gold slime gets stronger by eating items, and that is why the cooldown decreased too. Paume says, "Now I understand why all the parties before failed the mission. The monster has grown so much that it can belong to Yellow Gate, which is 2 levels above the Red Gate. It's already out of league of first-class circle adventurers." He says, "It looks like this mission is a failure since there are no objects left to retrieve in this dungeon." Then he remembers Abby's words and gives a slight smile. We see the adorable slime slugging its way through the woods, then it notices something, and suddenly half of its head splits open by a surprise attack. Its goo starts melting the ground and it screeches while regenerating. Paume says I am sure that I aimed for the core, and compliments the slime for surviving the attack. He says if it's like this he will need 4 more and no 5 more attacks will be enough. He says it doesn't matter and with a smile on his face says I will just prove my worth. The slime fires its acid arrow at him but he dodges it by jumping off the tree. Then the boss simultaneously fires several acid arrow and he evades all of them. Paume uses his telekinesis ring to control the dagger and says I have to hit the same spot without missing. An ordinary mage wouldn't do this, but you guys know he is the main character, and one of his past life's title was the best telekinetic. He casts a fire arrow and hits the boss, he says 4 more to go. The monster fires another acid arrow, he evades it by climbing up a tree and swinging like a Tarzan. Paume while swinging casts another fire arrow and says 3 more to go. The boss fires an onslaught at Paume, but he skillfully evades them all and then casts another fire arrow, now to left. He pulls himself to tree and launches a fire arrow at the slime, but it dodges it this time. Paume says it's pretty quick for its size, but it's pointless. He activates his ring and controls the fire arrow and guides it back to the boss, hitting it at the right spot. Now the monster's core is exposed. Paume swings towards the core and says time for the last one, but we see the slime grows an arm trying to stop him. Paume notices it and activates his ring. He throws the dagger on the ground. Using the momentum of the dagger he pulls himself away from the attack, then stops himself while casting the fire arrow and launches it at the boss. The boss puts his hand in front to block the attack. Paume smiles and with the help of ring, he changes the arrow's course under his hand, striking directly at the core, causing it to glow brightly. The boss begins to grow larger in size and it explodes with a boom. As its acid begins to flood the area, Paume runs away from it. He uses his ring on the dagger, launching it towards a tree. It wraps around the tree and Paume quickly evades the acid and lands on the tree. Then Paume smirks since he is the emerging winner of this battlefield. The forest gets destroyed, but eventually the acid subsides. Paume comes down the tree and started inspecting the area, then he notices a shining object in the dust. He pulls the object towards him using the telekinesis ring. We see that it's a little red orb. It begins to glow in his hand, then it starts to emit a red aura and a red circle forms around him. It shifts to where Abby's and Paume are sitting. Paume says I am back. Abby's glares at him and then says that you are not just a big talker. He asks why is he back alone, and without any item. Paume replies that the party was just newbie hunters, so he left them. Then they encountered the boss monster and they died. Abby's asks what monster. Then he gets shocked upon knowing that it was a gold slime, since Abby's knew it was an acidic monster. Paume confirms his doubt that all the items melted away. Abby's grits his teeth with frustration because it was a fatty loss for the merchant union, and it is a problem that only Paume returned alive from that gate. We are briefed about the common rules of the gates. First is that only limited people can enter a gate, and nobody else can enter it until they all die. Second is that there are entrance limitation based on gate's difficulty and circle level. The difficulty color ranges from red to purple, and those with higher circles than gate difficulty level cannot enter. Third, there is only one entrance to gate and if people survive the gate, it cannot be entered again and breaks. Abby says that a gold slime must have been too much for a first circle and he understands that why he couldn't retrieve the items. But regardless of the reason, Paume failed the mission. Paume, while taking off his wrist brace, replies that I didn't explain the situation properly. Abby's was confused, then he shows his wrist which have 2 circles glowing, and while smirking says, I ate the slime. Abby's gets shocked after seeing it, and asks if he absorbed the mana stone of the slime. Paume says, this should be enough to prove himself and asks to give him a rank now. Abby's jumps of his seat, I seriously think he got piles issues. Abby's with a joyful expression says that he will give him D rank, but if Paume works with him he will treat Paume as a C rank adventurer. Paume quickly signs the contract. Abby's kindly explains to us readers that, giving an adventurer C rank who is not third circle is excessive treatment, since adventurer ranks are heavily influenced by circles. But our NC is built different and you can't level up just by consuming mana stones. Did he say survival instincts? Abby's while smiling nervously says, he has that survival instinct, no, an overwhelming talent. He had never seen this speed before. He smiles all giddy and says I need him. Paume sighs and says he seems pretty impatient. Well, there is not much time left until the Red Gate's first 100-man gate appears, and all of the big unions and guilds will be watching it. Paume puts down the pen on the table and says, there is no harm in advancing my plans since he is also in a rush. Paume tells Abby's that he has a favor to ask. Abby's replies to ask for it comfortably. Paume holds his hands out, saying to lend him some money. Abby smiles, but internally says he is going too far. The panel changes in more lore. Some people say that the gate started the era of adventurers, but it was all a trap of black magician. Many adventurers died in the gates, killing future potential of the Maple World. The last day that came after was when all the monsters came rushing through the gates and we lost. Exactly 3 years from now is when the Maple World face its fate. The panel changes back to Abby smoking, and he is watching Paume leave the Union. Paume says this much isn't enough, but it should be good enough to get started. The 100-member gate that will appear is red level, so only those with 2 circle can enter it. Usually the Union picks high-level adventurers, and the reason they are investing in him because they are surely aiming for the gate. Paume says, while I have obtained some money, spending it all on the items would be foolish, since the items for my level are expensive. He has an idea to buy something useful. Then we see him enter an area, whose name is written in Maple language. A man welcomes him to the slave market and asks what kind of companion is he looking for, a bait, or a warrior to fight alongside. Paume says, I have someone in mind and asks the man to lead the way. The man was surprised but guides him. He says that this is punishment area and it's for those who act up. They stops in front of a cage. The man, while nervously gulping, asks if he is sure he wants this guy, and warns him. Paume says he is sure as this was the guy he was looking for. Paume explains that before his regression how a death of certain someone sped up the end of the Maple World. The polearm hero named Aaron, she was killed. Her first and last student was this man, hero killer, Debo. Debo questioningly says, you came for me? He rudely says that I don't know you, so get lost. The slave handler apologizes for his behavior. Paume thinks that Debo is indeed very rude. The handler sighs and says that Debo is the only crazy one here. Paume smiles, saying that, after the last day, Debo was one of the only few people who got recognition alongside him. They were often compared since they were from the same region, awakened around same time, with similar skills too, but they have a bigger similarity. Paume asks how much does he cost? Debo asks if he even can afford it, and while grinning he says, 1 million meso. The similarity was that they both were desperate for money. Debo had a younger sister, who was infected from black blood disease. Debo tells him to get lost, if he can't afford it. Then Paume pulls something out of his bag, and Debo is surprised to see that Paume has the money. Debo asks if that money is real. Paume says the contract is of 1 year, and the profit-divide ratio is 7-3 and he'll have the priority from the gate drops. The handler is surprised as Paume is making the contract as a party member instead of a slave. Paume hands him the contract. Debo quickly snatches it, saying there is no taking it back. He bites at thumb and stamps the contract with his blood. Paume smiles and says we will be heading straight to a gate. With a serious expression, Paume says that Debo needs to prove his worth. Debo says that he will work harder than anyone he has seen before. The panel changes and we see them in a forest. Debo says I am grateful that you bought me a weapon, but I use long sword so we should change it. Paume replies that from now on he will be using a pole arm, and if he didn't like it they can end the contract. They went to a gate that has 1 scar and an entry limit of 8. Debo asks where rest of the party and the healer is. He says, if it's our boss with deep pockets, I'm sure there would be good party members. Paume just stares at him. Debo asks, could it be that there are not enough? Paume replies they have got more than enough members. Debo sighs out of relief, saying I got scared for no reason. Paume then points at Debo, and he goes back to being completely confused for a while. Then he shouts no way, and gets kicked into the dungeon. Debo screams while entering, and once they both enter, we see a rough terrain. Debo shouts, are you crazy? He says there are only 2 of them for an 8-man gate, and he has to use a weapon that he never used before. Paume says nothing and glares at him. Then Debo turns around to see smoke, as spider-like trees run towards them. They are called stumps. Debo realizes that he messed up by yelling, and readies his polearm. Paume tells him to move and comes in front of the horde of stumps. He casts fire arrow and instantly kills one. Debo gets surprised upon seeing this but watches as the fight is just getting started. Paume controls the fire arrow, wiping out the entire group of monsters. And when the last one dies, he says, it's disappointing how Debo acted, and says to not make such mistakes again. Debo, after watching Paume fight, he was like,
"Wait a minute! Who are you?"
The scene shifts to nighttime. A woman says that the merchant union took the bait. And we are still working on the plan, but we've already managed to pick out the people we'll be sending. We see someone holding the wine, and the woman asks if they have his permission to continue. The man replies yes, and then the woman fades out. The man says everything will be done according to that man's will, and raises the glass towards the moon for a toast, saying freedom for the maple world. Thanks for watching. Follow for more.